Snow whipped across the cracked asphalt of Route 9 like shattered glass. The storm came in off the Adirondacks without warning or apology, a wall of white fury that dropped on Harrow Falls County like a closing fist and turned the highway into a corridor of ice and absolute darkness. By 9 o'clock that Thursday night, every sane person within 40 miles had locked their doors, pulled their curtains, and settled in to wait out something the radio was calling the worst blizzard since 1993. Power lines were already down in 3 townships. The county emergency broadcast had been running on a loop since 7 warning motorists to stay off the roads, warning families to check on their elderly neighbors, warning anyone foolish enough to be outside that the temperature was sitting at 11 below zero and dropping. Vera Callahan was not a sane person. She came around the long banked curve at mile marker 34 at just under 70 miles per hour, her customized 1998 Harley-Davidson leaning into the wind with the reckless, bone-deep ease that only comes from 30 years in the saddle. The temperature had dropped to 11 below zero. The wind chill made it considerably worse. Snow hit her visor in horizontal sheets, each flake a splinter of glass against the polycarbonate, and the road ahead was nothing but a pale black tunnel swallowed by white. Her single headlight carved maybe 20 feet of visibility out of the storm. That was enough. That had always been enough. She had ridden in worse. She had ridden in conditions that would have made this blizzard look like a mild inconvenience in rain and fog. And once memorably through the tail end of a hurricane on a stretch of Virginia highway where the wind had tried to take the bike out from under her 3 separate times. She had held on all 3 times. People who saw the heavy leather jacket, the road name stitched in red above her left breast, Rook and the chapter officer's patch below it, reading Road Captain, generally assumed she rode in weather like this because she was tough, because she had something to prove, because women who had spent 30 years running with the upstate chapter of one of the country's most feared motorcycle clubs had earned the right to ride through anything the sky could throw at them. Because a woman who had been road captain for 11 years, and before that a full patch for 19, had accumulated the kind of credibility that does not require good weather to maintain. They were wrong about the reason. She was not riding to prove something. She was not riding because the cold felt like an accomplishment. She was riding because of a memory, and riding was the only thing she had ever found that put enough distance between herself and it. 5 years ago, Danny Mercer had died on a road not entirely unlike this one. He had been her brother in every way that mattered, not by blood, but by the 31 years they had run together, the miles they had covered. The particular kind of trust that only exists between people who have stood back to back in situations where turning around was not a viable option. He had been the club's vice president and Rex Holloway's best friend. He had been the smartest man Vera had ever known and the most careful and the most deliberate. He had been the kind of man who did not make things without purpose, who did not say things without meaning them, who did not leave without making sure the important things would last after he was gone. He had built things to last. He had left breadcrumbs only for the people he trusted. And on a cold November night 5 years ago, he had called Vera from a county road at 11:43 in the evening and spoken for 90 seconds and said, among other things, 3 words that she had been carrying inside her chest like a stone ever since. His voice had been calm. That had been the part that stayed with her. Not fear, not urgency, but a kind of deliberate calm. The calm of a man who has already made his peace with the situation and is now focused entirely on making sure the right things get said in the time remaining. Don't let them bury the truth with me, Vera. 3 hours later, his motorcycle had been found crushed against a guardrail on County Road 7. The impact had been catastrophic, the kind of damage that happens when a moving vehicle hits a stationary motorcycle at speed and doesn't slow down. Sheriff Dale Aldridge had been on scene within the hour. He had ruled it a hit and run within 72 hours before the forensic analysis was complete, before the county medical examiner had finished his report, before anyone with a genuine interest in the truth had been given adequate time to look at what the evidence was actually saying. The evidence files had subsequently disappeared from the county records building in a manner that the sheriff's department described as administrative error, and that everyone who had known Danny Mercer described as something else entirely. They had tried every channel available to them. They had hired attorneys. They had paid private investigators. They had made inquiries through people who knew people, which was a form of investigation that the club had always found more productive than formal channels. They had found nothing that could be used. Every door they pushed on turned out to be a wall. Every record they requested had been sealed, rerouted, or simply did not exist in any form that could be retrieved. The system had closed around Danny Mercer's death like water closing over a stone completely without leaving a surface mark. Vera pushed the throttle harder. The Harley's V-twin roared against the howling dark. The engine sound was the one thing in the world that reliably occupied the part of her brain where the memory lived. When the engine was loud enough, there was no room for anything else. Every mile she put behind her was one more mile away from the clubhouse and the walls, and the silence of her own room, which was the one place the memory could not be outrun, because it was the one place the engine was quiet. She almost missed it. Her headlights swept across the pale concrete of the guardrail barrier on the right shoulder, and for a fraction of a second, a single fragile fraction of a second, the beam caught something that did not belong. A shape, too compact to be road debris, too deliberately placed, pressed hard against the base of the barrier as if someone had set it there, or thrown it, or kicked it down a snowy embankment and left it. Black plastic, faded denim, and a pair of hands. Small hands, blue-tinged at the fingertips, too still. Vera's boot found the brake pedal with the force of pure reflex. The deep instinct of a person who has spent 30 years making split-second decisions from the seat of a moving motorcycle and has learned to trust the instinct before the conscious mind has finished processing. The Harley shrieked. The rear tire broke loose, fishtailing across a ribbon of black ice before the front wheel found a ridge of packed snow at the shoulder and jolted to a violent, shuddering stop. The guardrail came within 8 inches of her left knee. She sat there for 2 full seconds, the engine idling its deep, steady idle, the wind screaming around her helmet, her heart slamming against her ribs with a force she could feel in her fingertips. Then she dropped the bike against the barrier and ran. Her boots punched through knee-deep drifts in long, urgent strides. The wind fought her every step, trying to push her back, trying to slow her down. She fell to her knees in the slush beside the black plastic bag and stopped. Her hands were shaking. She noticed that distantly, with the part of her brain that always kept watching, even when the rest of it was running on something rawer than thought. Vera Callahan did not shake. She had not shaken sitting beside her sister's hospital bed through 3 days of machinery and silence 15 years ago. She had not shaken in situations that would have undone most people. She was shaking now, kneeling in the snow beside a black plastic garbage bag on a frozen highway in a blizzard, and she noted it the way you note a fact that matters and file it away. The bag was tied at the top with a double knot of orange baling twine pulled tight, sealed against whatever was inside. The kind of knot a person ties when they want to make sure it stays tied. She stripped her riding gloves off with her teeth and tore the knot apart with her bare hands. The cold hit her fingers like a blade, immediate and vicious, the kind of cold that moves from discomfort to damage in minutes. She kept going. The plastic peeled open. Inside, curled into a rigid, tight C shape, was a boy. He could not have been older than 8. He was dressed in a denim jacket 2 sizes too large and a faded gray t-shirt and a single sneaker on his left foot. His right foot was bare. The exposed skin of that foot had already begun to take on the darkened, waxy quality of deep frostbite, the color of a bruise that has been left too long purplish at the toes, fading to gray at the ankle. His lips were the blue-purple of old storm clouds, nearly bloodless. His eyelashes were white with frost, the lids closed and completely still, the skin beneath them almost translucent. His face beneath the grime and the bone and the particular hollowness that comes with extended starvation had the quality of something very fragile holding on to something very stubborn. Vera pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck, to the soft place beneath the jaw, where the pulse lives when it is strong enough to find. Nothing. The wind howled. Bald. The snow drove sideways across her knuckles, melting instantly where it touched the skin, running cold water down her fingers. Nothing. Nothing. Then there, the faintest flutter, erratic and desperately weak, barely a suggestion of a beat, a pulse that felt like it was having a conversation with itself about whether to continue. But it was present, unmistakably, undeniably present. She pulled him from the bag with both arms and pressed him against her body, wrapping herself around him, trying to create a seal between his frozen core and the cold air that was actively working to finish what someone had started. He weighed almost nothing, less than she expected, less than a child his size should weigh, and the wrongness of that weight told her everything she needed to know about what his life had looked like before tonight. She could feel his ribs against her forearms through the denim jacket. She could feel the terrible stillness at his center, the cold that had already migrated inward from his skin toward the place where the engine of him ran, working with the patient efficiency of something that does not hurry because it does not need to. She stripped her heavy leather riding jacket, the one with the death's head patch on the back, and the road captain rocker across the bottom, and 11 years of hard miles worked into the grain of the leather, the jacket she had worn through every kind of weather and trouble the road had offered, and wrapped it around him, swaddling him in the thick fleece lining until only his face was visible. Then she picked him up and carried him back to the bike. Getting them both onto the machine was a fight against physics and cold and wind that she was absolutely not going to lose. She had not pulled this child out of a garbage bag to lose him to logistics. She braced the Harley with her hip mounted at one-handed, with the boy cradled against her chest, got them both settled with the ball between her body and the gas tank, then unzipped her secondary windbreaker and zipped it around both of them, creating a cocoon of shared body heat that pressed his cold chest directly against her own. She could feel his heart. Slow, too slow, dangerously slow, like a clock that someone has been winding less and less and is now ticking toward the moment when the spring gives out entirely. But there, still there. She pulled back onto Route 9 with one hand on the throttle and the other arm locked around the boy's back, holding him flush against her, maintaining every degree of warmth she had to give him. "I've got you," she said into the wind. He couldn't hear her. The storm and the engine and the velocity of cold air between them swallowed the words before they traveled 3 inches. But she kept saying it anyway because she needed to hear it herself, needed the words in her own ears to keep the part of her that was afraid, the part she never acknowledged and rarely felt from taking up too much space. "I've got you. You stay with me. You stay right here with me." She opened the throttle as wide as she dared with one arm occupied and a boy's life balanced on the tank in front of her. The steel mill sat at the end of a half-mile private access road off Route 14 behind 8 acres of chain-link fencing and dense pine forest that served as a natural buffer between the club and a world that had never been entirely comfortable with its existence. The upstate chapter had purchased the abandoned munitions factory through layers of shell companies in 2004 and spent 4 years and a considerable amount of money converting it into something that served equally well as a home, a fortress, a workshop, and if it ever came to that, which it had come to before and would likely come to again, the last place anyone who meant harm would want to find themselves. The front wall was reinforced steel plate behind corrugated aluminum siding. The main doors weighed 400 pounds each and ran on motorized rollers that could be operated remotely from inside. The windows had been boarded from the inside with 3/4-inch plywood over sheet steel. The perimeter fence was topped with concertina wire. The access road had pressure plates buried at the quarter-mile mark that sent a signal to a monitor inside the main hall. There were cameras at the gate at both corners of the building and covering the rear loading dock. None of it was visible from the road. None of it announced itself. To anyone passing on Route 14 at night, it looked like a decommissioned industrial building behind a fence, dark and unused and uninteresting. That was entirely by design. Vera flashed her high beams 3 times at the main gate. The signal never changed, had never changed in the 11 years she had been making it. The gate rolled aside. She rode through without slowing, hit the main doors at 40, flashed again. The steel doors ground apart just wide enough to admit the bike and its cargo. She killed the engine the moment she was inside and screamed into the echoing industrial dark before the wheels had finished rolling. "Walt, I need Walt out here right now." The main hall of the steel mill was cavernous, 120 feet long and 60 wide, with exposed steel beams crossing the ceiling 30 feet above, and the permanent comforting smell of motor oil and wood smoke and stale coffee worked into every surface. Pool tables near the center, a long scarred oak bar along the left wall lined with mismatched stools, workbenches covered in engine parts along the right, a massive ironwood stove in the far corner, glowing cherry red, radiating enough heat to keep the whole space above 60, even in the worst of what the Adirondacks could produce. Perhaps 80 men in leather and denim spread across the room at various stages of the kind of evening that fills itself without needing to be organized, card games and wrenches and bottles, and the particular low-frequency conversation of a large group of men who are comfortable with each other in the way that only comes from years of shared experience. Every single one of them went completely still when Vera Callahan came through those doors. The silence lasted exactly 1 second. Then it broke not into noise but into motion, which was the steel mill's version of an emergency response. Hank Briggs moved first, which was always how it went in situations that required immediate physical response, because Hank Briggs was the kind of person who had processed the situation and made his decision and started moving before most people had finished processing it. He was 6 feet 4 and built in the way of men who have done physical labor their entire lives, not sculpted, but layered dense in the shoulders and the forearms, with a dark beard so thick and full it seemed to have its own climate, and heavy-lidded dark eyes that were considerably more alert than his general demeanor suggested. He had been lying on his back under a Sportster he had been working on for 3 weeks, and he came out from under it and across the floor in 6 strides, his heavy work boots ringing hard on the concrete. "Vera, what in the back? Give me room." She was already off the bike, already unwrapping the boy from the windbreaker, already lifting him free and holding him against her chest. "He's freezing to death. I need Walt, and I need that stove banked hard, and I need warm fluids, and I need it all right now." "Where is Walt?" The crowd parted. Not because anyone told it to, but because the crowd understood from Vera's face and from the small, still bundle in her arms that this was the kind of moment that does not negotiate with obstacles. Walt Pruitt came through from the back corridor at a half jog, which was approximately the fastest Walt moved since his knees had entered into their long and unresolved argument with him several years ago. He was 64 with a face that had the color and texture of old saddle leather and a white beard he kept trimmed to his collar, and hands that were large and square-fingered, and when they needed to be, extraordinarily precise. He had been an Army combat medic, had served 2 tours in conditions that had taught him things about trauma and emergency medicine that no classroom ever could, and had subsequently lost his medical license after a 3-year federal sentence for matters the club had always considered to be between Walt and his conscience and nobody else. Inside the steel mill for the past decade, he had been the chief of everything that mattered when someone needed to be kept alive until a better option presented itself. He took one look at the boy in Vera's arms. His face ran through 5 separate expressions in approximately 2 seconds. Surprise, assessment, grim recognition of severity, decision and action, and then it went completely flat and professional, which was the expression everyone in the room had learned to read as the one that meant the situation was genuinely serious, and Walt had already decided what to do about it. "Long table. Set him down gently." He was already snapping on a pair of blue latex gloves he produced from his back pocket, already moving toward the table that Vic Tanner was in the process of clearing. "Vic, everything off that table right now. Hank, bank that stove as hot as it will go without cracking the iron. I need warm water, not hot warm around body temperature, and blankets and the heating pads from the red cabinet, and somebody needs to go to the back room and bring me the full medical bag. Not the small one, the full bag. The black one. Go." Vic Tanner, the chapter's sergeant-at-arms, a wiry man in his mid-40s with a spiderweb tattooed across the left side of his neck, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent a great deal of time in situations where unnecessary movement gets people killed, swept the remnants of a poker game off the long oak table in one clean, decisive motion. Cards and chips scattered across the concrete floor. Nobody complained. The table was clear in 30 seconds. Vera laid the boy down beneath the harsh fluorescent overhead lights. The fluorescent light was not kind to him. It revealed everything that the storm and the darkness had partially obscured. His rib cage was plainly visible through the soaked gray t-shirt, each individual rib a sharp ridge against bruised pallid skin. His collarbones stood out like ledges. His cheeks were sunken in the particular way of a child who has been not just hungry, but systematically starved, the body having begun to consume its own reserves in the particular sequence that starvation follows. First the fat, then the muscle, the body making brutal triage decisions about what it can afford to lose. His wrists were so thin, the individual bones moved independently under the skin when Walt took his hand to check the pulse. And the bruises, old ones, mostly yellowed at the edges, in the way of bruises that are weeks old rather than days, concentrated on the forearms and the upper arms and the shoulders, told a story that had nothing to do with childhood accidents. They were in the particular locations and had the particular shapes of bruises left by a large hand, grabbing repeatedly with force over an extended period of time. The room went to a different quality of silence when the men around the table understood what they were looking at. the kind of silence that settles into the jaw muscles and the hands. Walt worked without commentary, without drama, without any of the particular performance that crisis sometimes produces in people who need to demonstrate their competence. He checked pupils with a small flashlight, assessed respiration by watching the chest and counting, listened to the heart and lungs with a stethoscope he produced from the full black medical bag that arrived at his elbow 30 seconds after he asked for it. He pressed carefully along the boy's abdomen, checked capillary refill in the fingernails, read the core temperature from a proper medical thermometer, and delivered the number to the room in the same tone he would have used to report the weather. Several men around the table winced at the number. Vera filed it and did not react. Significant hypothermia, Walt said, already reaching for the warm saline bags he had directed someone to press against their own chest to bring the temperature up. We bring his core temperature up slowly. Aggressive rewarming at this level of severity causes the heart to go into arrhythmia. Slow and controlled. Warm damp towels to the armpits and the back of the neck changed every 3 minutes as they cool. Blankets warm near the stove first, not room temperature warm. IV line for warm fluids as soon as I can find a vein worth using. The frostbite on the right foot needs attention, but it is secondary to the cardiac risk. Heart first, everything else after. Can you find a vein? Vera asked. His veins are collapsed from the cold. I'll try the wrist. If that fails, I have other options. Walt looked up at her briefly. Where did you find him? Route 9, mile marker 34. He was inside a garbage bag, Walt, tied shut with twine, double knotted. Walt looking back down at the boy. Something moved across his face that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the particular kind of anger that men who have seen a great deal of human cruelty carry very quietly in a place they rarely open. He did not say anything. He went back to work. For the next 2 hours, the steel mill was transformed into something it had never quite been before. The 80 men of the upstate chapter moved around that medical table with a quiet, careful precision that would have astonished anyone who knew them only from the outside. They took turns pressing warm saline bags against their own chests and sides before handing them to Walt, their body heat serving as the warming mechanism. They brought blankets from every corner of the building, from bedroom cots and storage closets, and the backs of chairs, and piled them in careful layers. They kept the iron stove roaring, kept the ambient temperature in the main hall above 70 for the first time anyone could remember. Nobody played pool. Nobody dealt cards. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Nobody left the building. 80 men stood in a loose, respectful ring around an 8-year-old boy, and they were quiet. Walt found a vein on the second attempt in the thin inside of the left wrist and ran warm saline at a rate he adjusted 3 times over the first hour, monitoring the boy's pulse and respiration with the metronomic consistency of someone who has done this before in places and conditions that made a heated factory feel like a hospital suite. He applied warm towels to the armpits and the back of the neck and cycled them every 3 minutes with a particular patient discipline of someone who understands that the clock matters even when nothing appears to be happening. Vera sat on a wooden crate beside the table and held the boy's left hand between both of hers. She rubbed it slowly, methodically, with the circular motion that generates friction heat. She watched his face. She was not a person who prayed. She had not been a person who prayed for a very long time, and the circumstances of the past 5 years had done nothing to restore that particular practice. But she found herself doing something that operated by essentially the same mechanism, a focused, wordless insistence directed at something she could not name, that this particular outcome be different from the other outcomes she had sat beside and watched arrive. She noticed the chain somewhere around the 40th minute. It was buried under the collar of the soaked gray t-shirt, completely invisible in the grime that covered most of the boy's neck and upper chest. She caught it only because she was shifting a warm, damp towel along his collarbone, and the harsh fluorescent light caught a glint of silver in the fold of the fabric. She lifted it with one careful finger, sliding the chain free of the neckline. The chain was heavy, solid silver, the kind that does not come from any chain jewelry store or department counter. Real weight to it, the kind that settles against the palm and announces itself as something that was made to last. At the end of it was a ring, a man's ring, thick-banded, substantial, solid cast silver. Custom work, she could tell from the weight and from the extraordinary level of detail in the centerpiece. A grinning skull with deep hollowed eye sockets and cheekbones that had been carved with the kind of precision that does not come from a mold. The lower jaw bore a diagonal fracture line that ran from the left corner of the mandible to the right side, a deliberate crack built into the design itself, so natural-looking it seemed structural rather than decorative. The silver was old, scratched and dulled with years of wear, carrying the particular dark oxidation of silver that has spent a long time pressed against a person's skin, absorbing the oil and warmth of them, developing the patina that no jeweler can fake. Vera had seen this ring before. She had seen it on Danny Mercer's right hand for 11 years. She had watched him commission it from a custom jeweler in Saratoga Springs, a man named Aldous, 70 years old, who worked out of a cluttered shop on a side street, and who Danny had sought out specifically because Aldous was known to do work that lasted. She had seen the ring on Danny's hand in firelight at 100 club nights, and in the rain, on in the rain at 100 miles of road. She had seen it the last time she had seen Danny alive, on the night he had driven out of the steel mill parking lot and called her 90 minutes later from County Road 7 to tell her that something was coming and to make sure the truth did not get buried with him. She had been at his graveside. She had noticed standing at the graveside that the ring was not on his hand in the casket. She had assumed Sarah had kept it. She had been at Sarah Mercer's graveside 6 months later and had assumed the ring had gone into the ground with her. She had been wrong about where the ring had gone. Vera's hand went rigid around the chain. She could feel the stillness traveling up her arm and into her shoulder and across her chest, the full-body response of a person who is trying very hard not to visibly react to something that is going off inside them like a charge. She breathed through it, deliberately. One breath, then another. Then she set the ring gently back against the boy's chest, stood up from the crate and crossed the room to the far end of the bar where Rex Holloway was standing. Rex Holloway was the kind of large that has nothing to do with height or with the number on a scale, and everything to do with the quality of space a person occupies when they are in a room. He was 6'2" and broad through the shoulders, with iron gray hair worn short and a close-trimmed beard that had been fully gray for years, and a set of dark, deep-set eyes that moved across a room with the slow, comprehensive attention of something that does not need to hurry because it does not miss anything. He had been holding a cup of black coffee for the past 2 hours without drinking it, standing at the far end of the bar and watching everything from there with the patient, total attention of a man who has spent decades leading people through situations where the quality of his observation was the difference between good outcomes and the other kind. He had not said much. He did not say much in general, which was one of the things that made people listen very carefully when he spoke. Vera stopped in front of him and held up the chain with the ring hanging from her fist. She watched his face. She had seen Rex Holloway in a great many states over the years. She had seen him furious, the cold, absolute fury that very large and very disciplined men enter when something has crossed a line that patience cannot accommodate. She had seen him in grief twice before, both times at funerals, and he had been controlled and present and presidential about it, in the way that men who carry responsibilities for others learn to manage their own sorrow on a delay. She had never seen what she was seeing now. What she was seeing was unguarded grief arriving on his face all at once, the wave breaking before he had the opportunity to brace for it. Just a fraction of a second, the kind of expression that a man can only hold for a fraction of a second before everything in him rises up to contain it, because to hold it longer would be to come apart in front of 80 people, and Rex Holloway had never come apart in front of anyone in his life. The wave passed, his jaw tightened, his eyes went very still, the particular stillness of a person who has just received devastating information and has made the decision to keep functioning. "Where did you get that?" he said. Not a question, a statement that required confirmation. "The boy's wearing it, under his shirt. It's been there all along." Rex set down his coffee cup on the bar with a care that was slow and absolute and final. He walked to the medical table. The crowd opened for him without being asked. He stood over the boy for a long moment, looking down at that small, bruised face in the harsh fluorescent light. The color had improved somewhat in the 40 minutes since Vera had brought him in. The blue was retreating from the lips, the skin less waxy. The breathing was deeper, settling towards something that resembled actual rest rather than near cessation. But he was still so thin, it was painful to look at, still so small against the dark oak surface of the table. Rex stood there for a long time. Long enough that the men around the table began to understand that something specific was happening, something beyond the general emergency of the night. "He's Danny's boy," Rex said quietly. 2 words followed by 3 more. 5 words that compress 5 years of searching and not finding and refusing to stop looking into a single suspended moment. The room received them the way a room receives something that changes the air pressure. Danny Mercer had joined the Upstate chapter at 23 and earned his full patch at 26 and been elected vice president at 30, which made him the youngest VP in the chapter's history. He had been the kind of man that hard, self-reliant, deeply skeptical people elect to lead them without being entirely able to explain why, the kind of man whose presence makes everyone around him feel without any rational justification that the situation is manageable, that there is a plan, that things will turn out the way they should. He had been Rex Holloway's best friend for 18 years, which in the context of the life they led was a different and deeper thing than the word best friend ordinarily suggests. He had been found dead on County Road 7 on a cold November night 5 years ago. His son Cole, 3 years old at the time, barely old enough to hold a memory, had been absorbed into the county child welfare system within 48 hours of Danny's death. His wife Sarah had been found dead of an apparent overdose 6 months later in the apartment she had been placed in by the county after her husband's death. The club had spent 2 years and a significant amount of money trying to find Cole Mercer through legal channels and through channels that were less legal but sometimes more effective. His records had been sealed, his placement history had been classified under a juvenile protection order that the club's attorney had spent 18 months trying to penetrate without success. He had vanished into the machinery of the system the way small things without advocates vanish completely, without surface trace, as if the system had swallowed him and closed over him and moved on. And now here he was, 8 years old and barely 80 pounds, with frost still clinging to his dark eyelashes, and his father's ring around his neck, found in a black plastic garbage bag on the shoulder of Route 9 in the worst blizzard in 3 decades. Rex turned to face the room. His voice did not need to be raised. It never did. I need quiet and I need focus. This is Danny Mercer's son. His name is Cole. Somebody put him in a garbage bag on Route 9 tonight and left him there to die in this storm. Before we do one more thing tonight, I need to know who. As if the boy had been waiting for his name, he stirred. It was barely a movement at first, a shift in the fingers of his left hand, a flutter of the eyelids, a sound that was more breath than voice, a small, involuntary noise that might have been a word or might have been nothing at all. But Walt straightened immediately, one hand moving to the boy's wrist to monitor his eyes on the boy's face, and the crowd pressed slightly in before catching itself and pulling back. The boy's eyes opened. They were a remarkable color, clear and pale and hazel, almost golden in the harsh fluorescent light overhead, and framed by dark lashes that were still slightly clumped from the frost and the melting. He stared at the corrugated steel ceiling above him for a long moment, the particular unfocused stare of someone whose body has been a long way away and is finding its way back. Then his head turned slowly and with visible effort, and he looked at Vera first because she was the closest. She watched his gaze move across her face, the road-worn lines of it, the silver threading through her dark hair, the rook patch on the cut draped over her shoulders, the death's head emblem on the breast. Then his eyes moved past her to the ring of enormous, bearded, heavily tattooed men in leather and denim, standing in a silent circle around the table staring down at him. The terror was immediate and absolute and entirely understandable. He scrambled backward on the table, frail arms shaking and then buckling, Walt catching him by the shoulders before he could slide off the edge. Easy. Vera moved her wooden crate between the boy and the rest of the room, blocking his sight line, with her body putting herself between him and the thing that was frightening him. Her voice dropped to something low and private. Easy now. Nobody here is going to hurt you. I'm going to promise you that right now, and I don't make promises I don't keep. You're safe, you're warm, you're in a safe place, and you are not going back to wherever you were tonight. My name is Vera. I found you on Route 9. Do you understand me? You're safe. He stared at her, breathing fast and shallow, and the panic still very present in his eyes. Then his gaze moved to the ring on his chest, to the familiar weight of it, and something in him steadied slightly. Cole, he said after a long moment. The word came out barely above a whisper, scraped raw, as if the machinery of his voice had not been used in a very long time. My name is Cole. Cole. She let the name sit there. My name is Vera. The men behind me are my family, every one of them. And every one of them is going to make sure nobody gets anywhere near you again. She held his eyes with hers, steady and direct. Do you believe me? He looked at her for a long time. Then, degree by careful degree, the rigid tension in his small body began to ease the way a fist opens when the reason for clenching has been removed. Where is he? Cole whispered. Where is who, sweetheart? The policeman. The words came halting with the quality of something that has been held inside for a very long time and is not yet entirely sure it is safe to release. He said if I tried to get out of the bag, the wolves would eat me. He told me my dad didn't want me anymore. He said I was a loose end. The tears came then, not dramatically, not in sobs, just quietly and steadily, down the sides of his face onto the oak table beneath him, the tears of a child who has been crying alone for so long that he has forgotten that tears are supposed to stop. I'm not a loose end. I'm a person. The room was absolutely quiet. Vera reached over and put her hand over his. No, she said, you are not a loose end. You are a person. And you are Danny Mercer's son, and that means something very specific to every man in this room. She paused. The policeman's name, Cole. Can you tell me his name? Carver. The name came out clearly and steadily, with the precision of a word that has been repeated internally many times and is finally being delivered to the right audience. Deputy Carver. He kept me at his house, in the basement. He said the feds were asking questions and he had to clean up the mess. Cole's jaw tightened in a way that looked startlingly adult on an 8-year-old face. He kicked me down the hill and said the bag would keep the snow off. A pause. I want him to get in trouble. That's why I'm telling you. Nobody in the room moved. Nobody spoke. Vera looked up over the top of Cole's head and found Rex's eyes. Ray Carver. Deputy Ray Carver, Dale Aldridge's chief enforcement officer for 12 years. The man who ran the field operations for the Harrow Falls County Sheriff's Department. The first officer to arrive on scene when Danny Mercer's motorcycle had been found crushed on County Road 7. The man who had signed the first responding unit's report. The man whose name appeared on the chain of custody documentation for the physical evidence from Danny Mercer's death scene, the evidence that had subsequently disappeared. Rex held Vera's gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he crossed to Walt, spoke quietly, and Walt nodded and pulled his chair directly to the bedside and set a heavy revolver across his knee in a way that managed to be simultaneously casual and absolutely unmistakable. Rex came back to the bar. When he spoke, the grief was entirely gone from his voice, replaced by something older and colder and considerably more functional. Carver kept that boy off the books, Rex said low enough that the statement was for Vera and the 3 men closest to them. No records, no court order. He was using him as insurance, something to hold over the situation in case Danny had left evidence pointing back to him. And when the federal pressure got close enough to be dangerous, he tried to remove the last witness. He looked at the ring lying on the bar where Vera had set it, which means Carver knows or suspects that Danny left something behind, which means there is actually something to find. Vera looked at the ring. She thought about 11 years of watching Danny wear it. She thought about the craftsmanship of it, the extraordinary precision of the custom work, the cracked jawbone she had always taken as an artistic choice, a decorative detail. Nothing more the kind of thing a skilled jeweler adds for visual interest. Danny Mercer had not been a man who made things without purpose. He had not been a man who included details without reason. He had not been a man who left anything to chance when there was a deliberate alternative available. Walt, Vera said, I need you to look at something very carefully. She picked up the ring from the bar and held it directly under the overhead light. The crack along the jawbone, she said. Look at it. It's not a crack. It's a seam. Walt looked at her for a long beat. Then he was already going for his bag, coming back with a jeweler's loop and a set of precision instruments, optical-grade screwdrivers with tips finer than a hypodermic needle, the kind of tools that belong in a watchmaker's shop rather than a motorcycle club's medical cabinet. Walt had acquired many things over the years that did not immediately explain themselves. He fitted the loop over his right eye, brought the ring into the circle of light on the bar surface, and his hands went completely still in the way that hands go still when they are being asked to do something that requires everything they have. The room gathered itself around the bar. All of it. 80 men in leather and denim pressing in close and going very quiet. Cole watched from the table with his pale gold eyes tracking every movement, following the ring with the intensity of a child who understands that something important is happening. There, Walt said after a suspended moment, inside the left eye socket, there is a pin, a concealed latch pin. He brought the smallest instrument to the eye socket of the skull, moved his hand by perhaps a millimeter, and then a click. The softest metallic click imaginable, barely audible, even in the absolute silence of the room, passing through the air like a single breath. The skull's lower jaw swung open on a hidden hinge no wider than a strand of wire. Nestled inside the cavity that ran along the hollow base of the jawbone were two things. The first was a micro SD card, black no larger than a thumbnail with a waterproof polymer coating that had kept it sealed and dry and intact through 5 years of being worn against a child's skin in every kind of weather. The second thing made Vera put both hands flat on the bar to keep herself upright. Etched into the interior of the silver in letters so fine they could only have been made with something like an engraver's needle under magnification were 6 words. Walt read them aloud into the silence because they needed to be heard, because some things need to be said out loud in a room full of people in order to become fully real. Vera, you always ride right. The room held the words for a long moment. Vera stood with both hands flat on the bar and her eyes on those 6 words etched in silver, and she breathed. In deliberately. Out deliberately. The fire crackled at its iron stove 40 feet away. The storm pressed against the corrugated walls with the patient, steady persistence of something that has all night and knows it the wind, finding every gap and seam and whispering through them. Danny Mercer had built this into the ring before he died. He had gone to the jeweler, gone to old Aldous in his Saratoga Springs shop, and commissioned a hollow space and a hidden latch and an SD card sized exactly for the cavity in 6 words engraved in the silver for the person he had decided to leave the truth with. He had done all of this knowing what was coming. He had put the ring on the chain around his wife's neck and told her what to do with it, and she had done exactly what he asked. She had kept it safe, and she had kept Cole safe, and she had put the ring on Cole's neck and told him never to take it off. And Cole had never taken it off, not through the group homes and the bad houses and the basement and the bag and the blizzard, not through any of it. He had kept it the way his mother had asked him to. And Danny had left the message, not for the club in general, not for Rex, not for any institutional recipient. He had left it for Vera Callahan, road captain by name, because he had known who he trusted with the truth. He had made that trust permanent by engraving it in silver that would outlast him. Vera picked up the SD card. It weighed almost nothing between her thumb and forefinger. She looked at it for a moment, this tiny thing that had survived 5 years inside a piece of jewelry worn by a small boy through everything the world had put him through, and then she handed it to Rex. Rex was already moving to the club's secure offline laptop, a machine with no wireless capability, no network connection, nothing that could reach the outside world, and plugging in the card reader attached to it. The screen came to life, one folder labeled in Danny Mercer's careful economical shorthand, The Devil's Math. Inside were 562 files. Rex opened the first, financial records. Wire transfers, hundreds of them, stretching back nearly a decade, meticulously documented with transaction dates and account numbers and corresponding amounts running through a chain of shell companies in Delaware and Nevada before arriving through a final untraceable hop at the personal banking record of Dale Aldridge, sheriff of Harrow Falls County. The amounts were not small. Rex opened the next file. More financial records, but these were different. These ran to accounts held by a name that Vera did not recognize, Marcus Vane. Rex opened the cross-reference file. A photograph, grainy but clear enough, a man in his early 50s, lean, with a forgettable face and the posture of someone who has spent years working very hard at not being memorable, and beside it a note in Danny's handwriting. The same handwriting she had seen on hundreds of club documents and notes over the years. Vane. Not law enforcement. Cartel Operations Coordinator, East Coast Distribution Network. Has used federal law enforcement cover on at least 3 documented occasions. Current alias unknown. If you are reading this, he is already looking for what I left behind. He may already know where to look. Move fast. Rex opened an audio file. The voice was immediately familiar. Dale Aldridge, the Harrow Falls County Sheriff, speaking in the flat, unhurried tone of a man having a comfortable private conversation, the tone of a man who believes himself to be entirely unobserved. He is talking to the feds. That is not something we can manage our way around. You know what needs to happen. A second voice, one Vera did not immediately recognize. I will handle it tonight. Rex sat back slowly from the laptop screen. He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at the room. Danny was tracking a man named Marcus Vane, Rex said. He is not law enforcement. He is cartel infrastructure, the East Coast Operations Coordinator for a distribution network that was running product through this county with Aldridge's active protection. And Danny's note says Vane uses federal cover. He comes in as an official, an auditor, an inspector, a regulator, and uses the credibility to move around without being examined. He looked at Vera. If Vane has found out we have the boy tonight, he will not wait. He will come here. Vera looked at the SD card in her palm, then at Cole on the table, who was watching Rex with those steady, old-soul hazel eyes, holding his father's ring in both hands. She stood up. Then we move first, she said. Carver doesn't know we have Cole. He thinks the boy is dead in a snowbank on Route 9. We go to Carver's cabin on Ridge Road, we bring him out alive. We get a recorded confession that names everyone above him, and then we get Danny's evidence to people who can do something with it. She looked at Rex. Tonight, before Vane realizes what's happening. Rex looked at her for a long beat. Then he gave a single nod. Southern flank, he said, with Hank. Vera pulled her riding gloves from her belt and started moving toward the convoy vehicles. From behind her, Cole Mercer's voice, still raw and quiet, but carrying clearly in the silent room, stopped her. Vera, she turned. Cole was holding his father's ring in both hands, the chain pulled in his lap, looking at the skull's face, the way children look at things they do not entirely understand but know are precious. Then he looked up at her with Danny's eyes. My mom gave me this before she went to sleep and didn't wake up, he said. She said my dad gave it to her. She said to never take it off, no matter what anybody said, no matter what happened. He paused. She said it was the most important thing he ever made. Vera crossed back to the table. She stood over this boy, this child, with his father's jaw and his father's stubborn, unbroken quality, the quality that had survived things that should have destroyed it long before now, and she took the ring from his hands and placed it carefully back around his neck and settled the chain under the collar of the clean shirt Walt had found for him. Your mom was right, Vera said. It was. She tucked the blanket under his chin. Walt's hand was already back on his revolver. Outside, the first truck engines turned over against the cold. The convoy moved without headlights, which in a blizzard was less of a handicap than it sounds. 12 matte black trucks rolling out of the steel mill access road in single file, navigating by moonlight filtered through storm cloud, and by the kind of intimate knowledge of these roads that comes from years of driving them in every condition. The blizzard had peaked and was beginning to ease, still heavy, still driving the snow sideways, but the ceiling had lifted slightly, and the moon was occasionally visible through the breaks, casting the snow-covered pines in a cold silver light that made the landscape look carved from a single piece of something pale and hard. Vera rode in the passenger seat of Rex's reinforced Ford Raptor, a suppressed submachine gun across her knees, the encrypted radio frequency running a quiet status loop in her earpiece. Rex drove with both hands on the wheel, navigating the hairpin curves of Ridge Road with the unhurried precision of a man who was doing exactly what the situation requires and nothing beyond it. No engagement with Aldridge's deputies unless they initiate, Rex said over the radio, his voice even, and carrying the particular quality of a man whose instructions are not suggestions. We extract Carver alive and we leave before Aldridge's department knows we were on the mountain. Speed and deliberation. Nothing more. The radio returned affirmatives from 11 other cabs. Vera watched the tree line moving past the window and thought about Danny. She thought about the 90-second phone call. She thought about the fact that he had known, specifically had built his knowing into silver and put it around his son's neck and had chosen her. Not the club as an institution, not Rex as its president, not any of the dozens of men who had known him longer or served with him more formally. Her, Vera Callahan, road captain, who had been his friend for 30 years and who he had apparently trusted without ever saying so directly to be exactly where she ended up being. She had spent 5 years thinking she had failed him. She was beginning to understand that he had never believed she would. They parked the trucks a quarter mile down a logging trail that branched off the main road, invisible behind a stand of dense pine, and moved on foot through the trees. 20 men in winter camouflage over their leather cuts, moving in silence through snow that muffled their footsteps to nothing. The cold was extraordinary, the kind that bypasses the usual stages and arrives directly at pain, but the adrenaline was doing its counterwork, and she barely felt it. Carver's cabin materialized out of the darkness like something that had grown there 2 stories squat and dark, isolated in a clearing that the pines made feel smaller and more enclosed than it actually was. A single dim yellow light glowed from a side window, casting a thin line of warmth across the snow. A county cruiser was parked crookedly out front, half buried in a drift, its engine cold. The chimney put up a thin thread of smoke that the wind shredded immediately. He was inside, he was warm, He thought tonight had gone exactly as planned. Rex signaled with two sharp chops of his hand. Hank Briggs and three others took the front approach. Vic Tanner and his unit flanked right. Vera moved with her three through the tree line to the rear exit coming up from below, where the slope of the terrain gave them cover and concealment until the last possible moment. She was in position at the rear door when she heard Rex put the breaching ram into the front entrance. The sound was enormous in the frozen silence, a catastrophic splintering crash of heavy steel driving through old oak and iron hardware, the sound rolling through the clearing and into the trees and back again. Then boots on hardwood fast in controlled voices calling clear from room to room. Vera put her boot into the rear door. It gave on the first contact. The lock was old, the frame older, and she had 3 decades of practice with doors that needed encouragement. She swept through the back hallway with her weapon up and her light low, clearing the kitchen corridor, finding nothing moving toward the staircase. The gunshot came from the second floor. One round, a large caliber pistol punching through the floorboards near the bottom of the landing and sending splinters across Rex's boots. A warning shot or a missed aimed shot, in either case the message was the same. Rex's voice came up the stairs clear and completely level. "Ray Carver, this is Rex Holloway. Put the gun down and come down the stairs, or I put a flare through that window and you can explain yourself to the fire. Your choice. 10 seconds. Silence from above. Then you've got no play here, Holloway. You come into my county, you come into my property." "Aldridge burned you tonight," Rex called back, cutting through the prepared speech. "The DOJ has been in his office since this afternoon. He's been throwing your name at them for 3 hours. He is not sending backup, Ray. He's sending cleanup. The difference between those two things is very specific and very permanent. You come down the stairs and you walk out of this alive. You stay up there and Dobson's kill squad arrives before dawn and you don't." The silence above was a different quality this time. The silence of a calculation being run by a man who has spent his career in law enforcement and understands in the marrow of him the difference between a threat and a fact. The sound of a service weapon tumbling down wooden stairs, clattering end over end, settling at the bottom with a final metallic scrape. Footsteps on the landing. Slow. The footsteps of a man descending stairs carrying the full weight of what he is walking toward. Ray Carver came into the light. He was thick-built in the way of men who were once athletic and have let the years do what they do, with a heavy jaw and small, deeply intelligent eyes, in a face that had the particular weathered quality of someone who has spent decades doing outdoor work and outdoor damage. He was in uniform, deputies tan and brown, but the uniform was disheveled in a way that suggested he had been in it for a very long time, and he was sweating despite the cold that was pouring through the breached front door in a steady flow. His hands were raised, and his face was the color of old ash, and his eyes were moving from face to face around the room with the professional, reflexive calculation of a law enforcement officer assessing a hostile environment, finding no avenue, and knowing it. Hank had him against the wall before Carver's foot cleared the last stair. Vic had the zip ties on his wrists before Carver had finished the first word of whatever protest he was assembling. "You have no idea what you've walked into," Carver said. The professional voice still operational, the authority still attempting to assert itself, despite the zip ties in the wall and the 11 weapons pointed at him from various angles. Vera came out of the back hallway and walked to where Carver was pinned. She pulled her winter balaclava down and stepped into his sight line, putting her face directly in front of his. She watched the recognition travel across his eyes, the name, the road name, the rank, the reputation arriving in sequence and arranging themselves into a picture that did not comfort him. "You put an 8-year-old boy in a garbage bag," Vera said. Her voice was quiet and flat, not angry. Anger has heat. This was something colder. "You tied it shut with twine. You left him on a frozen highway in an 11 below blizzard." She was close enough to him that she did not need to raise her voice at all. "And you thought that was the end of it." Something moved across Carver's face. Not remorse she could read. Faces had read faces across 30 years of situations where reading them correctly mattered, and what she saw was not remorse. It was calculation. The specific calculation of a man who has recognized that his only remaining asset is information. "Aldridge doesn't own this," Carver said. "Aldridge is a piece of it, a functional piece, but still a piece." Rex moved to stand in front of Carver. "Start from the top." Carver looked from Rex to Vera and back again. His eyes settled. He breathed through his nose twice. Then he spoke. There is an individual who has been operating in this county through Aldridge for 7 years. He goes by different names. The name he's using this week is Sutton. He told Aldridge he's a Department of Justice auditor. He is not. His actual name is Marcus Vane. He is the East Coast Operations Coordinator for a cartel distribution network that has been running product through this county by hiding it in the county's child welfare transport system, moving drugs in the vehicles and luggage of children being transferred between foster placements. Aldridge's department looked the other way. The county social workers were on the payroll. It was brilliant in its design, and it ran for 9 years without a serious problem. Carver paused. Danny Mercer figured it out. He spent almost 2 years documenting it. He built a file, financial records, audio recordings, wire transfer documentation. He called it the devil's math. A beat. Aldridge received a text message from Danny 40 minutes before the accident. It said, "The devil's math is on my boy. You touch him, the feds get the key." We didn't know what it meant. We searched the boy's belongings a dozen times. His clothes, his toys, everything he had. We found nothing. That's why Aldridge kept the boy in the system, where we could watch him. That's why I eventually took him off the official books. We thought maybe Danny had mailed something to the boy's name somewhere, a package, a drive. We were looking for a conventional hiding place. You were looking in the wrong place, Vera said. Carver stared at her, then at Rex, then at the absolute certainty on Vera's face, the certainty of a woman who has already found what he spent 5 years looking for, and something in his professional assessment, eyes went very flat and very still. If Vane knows you have that child, Carver said quietly, he will not send county deputies. He has resources that Aldridge never had access to. He will send people who do not negotiate and do not leave witnesses. Rex said, "Where is Vane right now?" When I left the precinct at 6, he was in Aldridge's office running the communications blackout protocol, keeping the county's dispatch dark so nobody outside the department could track what was moving. A pause. If he's learned you have the boy, he knows about the steel mill. Aldridge has had that location for years. Rex looked at Vera. 1 second. The two of them had been reading each other across situations like this for more than a decade, and 1 second was sufficient. Rex hit the encrypted radio. All units, immediate extraction. Back to the trucks now. We have potential hostiles at the steel mill. They were moving before the last word was out. The drive back was the longest 20 minutes Vera had spent in a very long time. She kept one hand on her weapon and the other on the radio, and she thought about Cole on the oak table with Walt's revolver across his knee, and she thought about the SD card and 562 files on an offline laptop in the main hall of a building whose location Aldridge had possessed for years. She thought about Marcus Vane, who used official cover and had cartel resources, and had spent 5 years being the invisible hand behind everything that had happened to Danny and Sarah and Cole Mercer. The convoy was 3 miles from the steel mill when the secure landline frequency crackled. It was Nell Braddock. Nell had been a county emergency dispatcher for 16 years, a fixture of the Harrow Falls Communications Center, a woman who had raised 2 daughters alone after her husband walked out, and who had a quality of calm practicality that never deserted her even in genuine emergencies. The club had done something for her older daughter 8 years ago, the kind of something that had required no discussion and left no record, and Nell had been their quietly indispensable connection inside the county system ever since. Her voice now had the particular quality of someone maintaining control over something that would very much like to come apart. Rex, it's not county deputies coming. Vane left the precinct an hour ago with 8 men. I have never seen any of them before. None of them local. None of Aldridge's badges on any of them. They left in 3 black SUVs, all modified, headed north on Route 14. She paused. They are not going to the steel mill to arrest anyone. Rex, these men are not police. How far ahead of us? They left 15 minutes ago. The snow is slowing them, but they know the roads. Another pause shorter. I'm sorry I don't have more. You've given us everything, Rex said. Lose this frequency. He hit the radio. All units maximum speed. Hostiles may already be at the mill. Go. Inside the steel mill, what happened next happened very fast. Vera was out of the Raptor before it stopped rolling, sprinting through the side door, calling Walt's name across the cavernous hall. Walt was on his feet with the revolver in his hand. Cole was sitting up on the oak table, the blanket around his shoulders, his eyes moving rapidly across the room, with the intelligence of a child who has learned to read situations before adults explain them. Rex was 20 seconds behind her. He crossed directly to the offline laptop, pulled the SD card from the reader, pressed it into Vera's hand, then the Raptor keys. Then he looked at her. "You take Cole," Rex said. "You drive through the rear loading dock, and you do not stop until Albany, FBI Field Office, Leo W. O'Brien Federal Building. You find the special agent in charge, nobody else. Not a duty agent, not whoever meets you at the door, and you put that card in their hands, and you say the words devil's math. That's all you need to say. They will know what to do." He paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Vera said. "Go now before they establish a perimeter." The first impact hit the front doors while Rex was still talking. The sound was beyond what a battering ram produces, deeper, more structural, the sound of something very large and very heavy moving at speed. The steel doors buckled inward along the center seam, the reinforced hinges screaming. Dust fell from the ceiling in a thin curtain. Pool balls rolled off their table and scattered across the floor. "That's a vehicle," Hank Briggs said from behind the bar, his voice completely steady, his heavy rifle already up. Rex's voice calm and final. "Vic." Vic Tanner was already at the reserve fuel line on the far wall road, flare in one hand, the particular expression on his face of a man who has been given a clear directive and intends to execute it cleanly. He had drained 6 gallons from the reserve bikes into a shallow channel he'd carved into the concrete floor. Not now, he had done this earlier, 20 minutes ago, when Rex had radioed the warning, because Vic Tanner prepared for things before they arrived. He looked at Rex. Rex gave one nod. In the same moment, the front wall of the steel mill gave way entirely. A heavy armored snowplow, stripped of its county markings and painted flat gray, drove through the reinforced steel barrier at 40 miles per hour, with the implacable momentum of something that has been aimed and released and does not have the capacity to change its mind. The plow blade tore up a section of concrete floor, sending a shower of broken concrete and sparks into the air. The gap it left in the wall was 8 feet wide and filled immediately by the men who came through it. 8 of them, dressed in flat black tactical gear and balaclavas and body armor, moving in practiced overlapping 2-man formations that announced their training immediately. These were not county deputies overweight and undertrained and accustomed to enforcing municipal ordinances. These were people who did this professionally, who had done it many times, who brought to it the calm efficiency of specialists. They swept the room and practiced arcs, identifying threats, acquiring targets. 80 patched members of the upstate chapter returned fire simultaneously from prepared positions, and the inside of the steel mill became something that could not adequately be described as noise, because it was beyond noise. It was a physical event, a pressure and a concussion and a continuing roar that made the walls shake and the overhead lights flicker. In the middle of it, Ray Carver, zip-tied and theoretically a captive, made the last significant decision of his life. He had worked the zip ties down his legs in the chaos of the first 60 seconds, stepping through them in a technique he had practiced as part of his escape and evasion training years ago. He had kept this possibility in reserve, and when he looked through the gun smoke and the strobing muzzle flash and saw the tactical team coming through the breach, his professional instinct, the instinct of a man who had spent his career being on the side with the badges, overrode the part of him that had been present in that room and had heard what Carver said about loose ends. He ran toward the breach, waving his freed hands, screaming, "Don't shoot, I'm law enforcement. I'm Deputy Carver, Harrow Falls County." The lead tactical operator pivoted without hesitation and fired 3 rounds, controlled and precise, and Ray Carver dropped to the concrete floor of the steel mill and did not move again. The operators did not break stride. He had been a loose end. He had just been tied. "Vic!" Rex roared from behind an overturned oak table. "Now!" Vic struck the road flare against the edge of the concrete channel. It sputtered and caught, casting that deep, malevolent red light across his face, across the spiderweb tattooed on his neck. He held it for one breath, one full deliberate breath, and dropped it into the fuel. The fireball that resulted hit the ceiling and rolled along it like something alive. The concussive shockwave traveled through the floor and through the walls and through the bodies of everyone in the room, knocking 2 of the tactical operators off their feet and throwing the others back from their positions. The armored snowplow's engine compartment caught in the secondary expansion and went up in a roar that blew the remaining front wall panels outward into the snow. The tactical team retreated from the heat, their formation breaking for the first time. their communications suddenly full of the sounds of a plan encountering something it had not anticipated. The fire created a wall. For 30 seconds, perhaps slightly more, the main hall of the steel mill was bisected by an impassable barrier of roaring orange and black smoke that neither side could cross. 30 seconds was what Vera needed. She had Cole in her arms before the fireball finished rolling. He had not screamed. He had pulled the blanket tight around his shoulders with both hands and pressed his face into the leather of her cut exactly as she had told him to, and she ran with him toward the rear of the building, her boots finding the floor through the smoke by memory. She hit the rear loading dock at a full sprint, shouldered through the service door, found the Raptor where Rex had left it with the engine idling and the heat running. She threw open the passenger door, set Cole into the seat, buckled the belt across his narrow chest in one practice motion, ran to the driver's side, vaulted in, put the truck in drive. The loading dock's corrugated aluminum roll door was closed and locked from the inside. Opening the lock would take 30 seconds. Vera had no interest in 30 seconds. She pointed the Raptor at the door and put her foot on the floor. 3 tons of American-built steel truck hit corrugated aluminum at 40 miles per hour. The door did not stop her. It screamed and folded and tore away in sections as the truck drove through it, and then they were outside in the frozen dark. The truck fishtailing hard in the deep snow on the back apron, the all-terrain tires biting and slipping and biting again as Vera wrenched the wheel and found traction and pointed them down the fire road that ran along the back ridge of the mountain. She had covered half a mile before the headlights appeared in her mirror. 2 black SUVs, high-riding and heavily modified, already accelerating across the snow-covered access road behind her. Perimeter units. They had anticipated this. Someone had told them to watch the back. The passenger window of the lead SUV dropped. A figure leaned out into the freezing air with a compact submachine gun. The burst came a half-second later. 3 rounds into the Raptor's tailgate, 1 through the rear window, the glass came apart, and cold air and glass fragments exploded into the cab. Cole cried out, throwing both arms over his face, and Vera reached across with her right hand and pressed his head down below the level of the dashboard, her eyes never leaving the road. "Keep your head down," she said. Her voice was steady. "I've got this. Keep your head down and hold on." She pushed the truck to 90s on a road that was suitable for 40 at best. The fire road was narrow and unlit and covered in accumulated snow over black ice, and she drove it at 90 because she had driven this road before in daylight and in the dark, and because the alternative was to let them close the distance. The lead SUV came up alongside her on the left, the shooter repositioning for a shot into the cab. Vera watched it in the mirror. She watched the geometry of the road ahead, the hairpin curve coming up in 200 yards, the drop on the outer edge, the exposed bank where the mountain fell away into the ravine below. She watched the SUV driver's attention, which was on her and on the shooter and not on the curve. She tapped the brake for exactly 1 heartbeat. Let the SUV pull half a length ahead of her. Then she floored the accelerator and threw the wheel hard right. The Raptor's reinforced front brush guard connected with the SUV's left rear quarter panel at the precise angle that the physics of vehicle dynamics require for a pit maneuver to work, which is to say the angle that transfers rotational momentum from the struck vehicle's rear end faster than the front wheels can compensate. The SUV's rear broke loose instantly. The front wheels steered in a direction the car was no longer going. The whole vehicle rotated counterclockwise with the helpless, inescapable inevitability of something that has been acted upon by a force it cannot negotiate with, and it crossed the shoulder doing 60 and hit the embankment lip and went over it, disappearing into the dark ravine below with a long diminishing sound of impact and silence. Vera did not watch it go. She was already through the curve and straightening out and finding the downhill grade that led to the county road that led to the interstate. The second SUV braked hard. She watched it in the mirror, watched it slow and stop at the edge of the curve, and she understood the calculation its driver was running, the same road, the same ISA truck that had just demonstrated what it was willing to do, and she drove away from it into the dark. Cole's hand found her forearm in the rushing cold of the cab. She covered it with her own hand without looking away from the road. "We're going to Albany," she said. "We're going to be okay." She drove south and did not stop. The storm broke somewhere around 3 in the morning while they were still an hour and a half north of Albany on Interstate 87. It broke the way catastrophic things sometimes do, not gradually, not with warning, but all at once, the whole apparatus of it simply ceasing the wind, dropping in a moment, the snow stopping between 1 second and the next, the clouds peeling back to reveal a sky full of cold winter stars burning with the particular clarity that comes after weather has scoured the air clean. Vera drove under them with the defroster running on maximum, watching the pre-dawn light begin to build along the eastern ridgeline, and she let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like many hours. Cole had fallen asleep against the passenger door somewhere south of Glens Falls. His head rested on the emergency blanket she had pulled from behind the seat, and his left hand was closed around his father's ring, the chain looped twice through his fingers, the way a child grips something important even in sleep. His breathing was deep and even. For the first time since she had pulled him from the garbage bag, it was entirely untroubled. She drove and thought about nothing, which was the correct thing to do for 2 hours after what had happened. Thinking too specifically about what had occurred in the steel mill, about the fire in the tactical team, and the sound of Ray Carver going down would produce a kind of internal noise that was not useful right now. She was driving. The driving was the thing. The road was the thing. Cole breathing steadily in the seat beside her was the thing. Everything else could be processed later when there was ground underfoot and walls around them and time to let the adrenaline finish its long chemical accounting. The interstate was nearly empty. The blizzard had accomplished what congestion never does, clearing the highway down to occasional freight trucks and a state police cruiser running escort for a plow convoy moving northbound in the opposite lanes. Vera set the Raptor to a steady 70 and let the miles run. Every pair of headlights in the mirror made her hand drift toward the weapon on the passenger seat. Every shadow under an overpass received a moment of her attention before she released it. The SD card was in her vest pocket, pressed against her ribs. She checked it 3 times without meaning to. Around 5 in the morning, Cole stirred. He turned against the blanket and looked at her with the full, immediate awareness of a child who has learned to come awake without transition, no grogginess, no reorientation, just the eyes opening and the situation already understood. "Are they coming after us?" he asked. "Not these ones," Vera said. He thought about this. "Are the people at the clubhouse okay?" "Your uncles are handling it." She glanced at him. "All 80 of them." He nodded slowly, looked at the road ahead for a moment. Then, "My dad was in the club. He was the best of us," Vera said. "Vice president, the kind of man that people follow without being asked." "How did he die?" She breathed through it. She had known this question was coming, had known it since the moment she recognized the ring, possibly since the moment she lifted Cole from the bag and felt the weight of him and understood that she was holding something specific and irreplaceable. "Some bad men were afraid of him," she said, "because he was honest. And honest people are the most dangerous thing in the world to people who have built their lives on a different basis. Your dad spent a long time collecting proof of what those men were doing. And when he knew the time was running out, he hid the proof where he knew it would be safe, where the right person would find it eventually." Cole looked down at the ring in his hand. "In here," he said, "not a question." "In there. He wrote your name." "He did. Why you?" Vera was quiet for a moment, watching the road. "Because he knew me," she said. 30 years of knowing me. He knew what I would do when I found you. He knew I wouldn't stop looking, and I wouldn't stop moving, and I wouldn't let anything that needed doing go undone." She paused. "He trusted me with the most important thing he had." Cole turned the ring over in his hands. The silver caught the first pale light of the approaching dawn. "My mom told me to keep it on," he said. "I kept it on." "You kept it on through everything," Vera said. "Your dad would be proud of you for that." Cole held the ring against his chest and looked out at the brightening sky and said nothing more. And Vera drove them south through the dying dark toward Albany as the stars went out one by one above the Adirondack ridgeline. The Leo W. O'Brien Federal Building occupied a full city block in downtown Albany with the solid permanent authority of federal architecture, granite and glass, the flag over the entrance, the security barrier at the approach, the particular quality of a building that expects to be taken seriously and generally is. By the time Vera pulled the battered, rear window missing passenger side glass scattered Raptor into the red curb zone directly in front of the main entrance, it was 7:14 in the morning and the city was waking up around them. Early commuters crossing the plaza with their coats pulled tight against the post-storm cold. She parked. She sat for one moment looking at the building. Then she lifted Cole from the passenger seat and carried him up the front steps. The federal security officer at the glass entry doors was young, well-trained, and in possession of the particular alertness that comes with the early shift on a cold morning. He looked at Vera, leather cut with a death's head patch, soot and grime on her face, burned jacket, the outline of a weapon at her hip, the general appearance of someone who has recently been in a place where things were burning, and his posture shifted and his hand moved toward his sidearm with the trained reflexivity of someone whose job is to take these cues seriously. Ma'am, you cannot park at this entrance and you need to step back. My name is Vera Callahan, she said. The voice did not need to be loud. It had the quality of voices that have learned to be heard without volume. I have physical evidence linking the Sinaloa cartel's East Coast distribution network to a federal law enforcement official currently using the alias Sutton in Harrow Falls County, New York. I have documented evidence of the murder of a federal informant 5 years ago and the ongoing systemic corruption of the county sheriff's department that covered it up. The child I am holding is the murdered man's son and the only living material witness to events that occurred in the last 12 hours. And if your special agent in charge is not in this lobby in 3 minutes, the man I am describing will complete his boarding of a private aircraft, and every piece of evidence I am carrying will become pointless. She held the officer's eyes. 3 minutes. Go. He looked at her face. He looked at Cole, who was looking back at him with those clear gold hazel eyes, and his father's ring clutched in both hands. The officer touched his shoulder radio. Control, I need SAIC Harlow in the lobby immediately. Code Bravo, I am not running a drill. They placed Vera and Cole in a secure holding room on the 3rd floor while the building routed itself around the situation. The room was clean and warm and furnished with the austere practicality of federal government, a table, several chairs, a couch against the wall, the particular institutional neutral of spaces that are not designed to be comfortable enough that people want to stay in them longer than necessary. A female agent named Torres brought Cole a cup of hot chocolate in a styrofoam cup and a bag of crackers and sat with him on the couch with a quiet and undemonstrative steadiness that told Vera something important about the culture of the office she was in. Vera sat with the SD card in her closed fist and watched the door. The first person through it was not Harlow. He was mid-40s, built in the careful way of someone who has invested considerable effort in appearing unthreatening. A broad, professionally calibrated smile, a hand extended, and an ID badge already visible before he had fully cleared the door frame. The ID badge read, Special Agent Douglas Fenn, Counterintelligence Division. His suit was well pressed. His shoes were the shoes of a man who had not been outside in the past several hours, let alone outside in a blizzard. They were too clean. At 7:14 in the morning, after the kind of night this county had just had, the shoes were too clean. Vera noticed the shoes first. She had a lifetime of practice at the specific skill of noticing things that do not fit. It was the skill that had kept her alive and functional through 30 years of a life that had very little margin for missed details, and it operated now before she had consciously processed what was wrong. The shoes, the suit, the practiced ease of his movement, the fact that he had come through the door before Harlow, the way his eyes moved to her hand before they moved to her face. Ms. Callahan, I'm Agent Fenn, the warm, practiced voice. Counterintelligence Division. I'm going to be your intake point while we get you situated and wait for SAIC Harlow. He pulled up a chair not directly across from her, not beside her, but at a slight angle that placed him between her position at the table and the door. The geometry of it was professional and deliberate. If you want to transfer the evidence now, I can start the chain of custody documentation immediately. Less for you to manage while you're waiting. Vera looked at him and said nothing. She was thinking about a note in Danny Mercer's handwriting on a 5-year-old file vein. Uses official cover. He comes in as an official and uses the credibility to move around without being examined. She was thinking about the kind of organization that within an hour of everything going wrong on a mountain in Harrow Falls County would already have a man positioned in the FBI field office in Albany. She was thinking about Marcus Vane, who was very good at what he did and who had spent 17 years doing it, and who would absolutely understand that the woman driving south on the interstate was heading for the federal building in Albany, and who would absolutely have a contingency in place for that. Which unit in counterintelligence, she said. Division 4, Domestic Operations. And Division 4 responds to walk-in material witnesses at 7 a.m. When the case involves potential federal law enforcement compromise, yes, we move quickly on those. He leaned forward slightly, the gesture of someone creating intimacy. Ms. Callahan, I understand tonight has been significant. Let me take some of the weight off you right now. The evidence is safe with me. I'll wait for Harlow, Vera said. Absolutely. He settled back in his chair with the easy patience of someone who has decided to wait her out. He did not move toward the door. While we wait the boy, Cole, is he the informant's biological son, or is there a custody situation I should be aware of for the documentation? That question is not for you, Vera said. I'm trying to build the intake file. Every question you have, Vera said, has the same answer. I will wait for Harlow. She held his eyes. The eyes were doing a calculation behind their professional warmth, a calculation running and running, looking for an angle. You can sit in that chair or you can leave this room. Those are your choices. A fraction of a millimeter of something arrived in the muscles around his eyes, a micro-adjustment that recalibrated the angle of his expression, and the warmth in it thinned by a precise, detectable degree. He stayed in the chair. Cole on the couch across the room had been tracking Fenn with the particular silent attention of a child whose body has registered threat before the conscious mind has assembled the evidence for it. Vera gave him the smallest movement of her head. Cole looked at the ceiling and began examining it with great apparent interest. The 4 minutes before Harlow arrived were among the most precisely weighted minutes Vera could remember sitting through. She sat across from a man who wanted something she was holding in a room she could not easily leave, and she held the SD card in her closed fist and held Fenn's eyes and did not look away, and Fenn held hers and did not look away, and neither of them spoke, and the room had the quality of a held breath that needs to be released and is waiting for the right moment. When the door opened, Vera recognized Harlow before she registered the badge. She recognized her by the quality of attention she carried into the room, the attention of someone who is genuinely looking, not performing, looking genuinely, processing what is in front of her rather than filtering it through a pre-existing narrative. Special agent in charge, Laura Harlow, was 53, tall, silver-haired, and carried herself with the economical precision of someone who has stopped spending energy on anything that does not advance the work. She came through the door and took the room in, and Vera watched her take it in. Vera at the table with her fist closed, Fenn in the chair, positioned between the table and the door, Torres and Cole on the couch, the specific geometry of the whole arrangement, and she watched something sharpen in Harlow's eyes. Agent Fenn, Harlow said in a tone of pleasant professional neutrality that had absolutely nothing warm in it. Counterintelligence doesn't run intake on material witnesses. I came down to help move things along, Fenn said, standing. The smile re-engaged. Given the time sensitivity, Harlow's radio was already in her hand. Torres, please take Agent Fenn to holding room B. Full protocol. She looked at Fenn with the direct, steady regard of someone who has already run the situation and knows exactly where it ends. Don't make the next 5 minutes complicated for yourself, Doug. You are smart enough to know what is already in motion. Fenn looked at her for a moment. The smile held in place like something nailed there, and behind it the calculation completed its final run and arrived at its terminal answer, and his face went flat and accepting. He walked to Torres. He did not look at Vera again as he left the room. The door closed behind him. Cole said from the couch in a voice of absolute and matter-of-fact certainty, I didn't like him. Your instincts are excellent, Harlow said, setting her coffee and her tablet on the table. She looked at Cole for a long moment, long enough to see him, specifically, him, the ring in his hands and the bruises on his wrists, and the quality of watchfulness in his eyes that does not belong to children who have had uncomplicated lives. Then she sat down across from Vera and looked at her. Show me what you have, she said. Vera opened her fist and set the SD card on the table. Harlow produced a secure tablet isolated device, air-gapped, she said briefly, and inserted the card reader. She opened the single folder. She read in the rapid, comprehensive way of someone who has learned to pull what matters from a document quickly, her eyes moving across the screen with a quality of focus that intensified as she went further in. She opened financial records, audio files, cross-referenced documents, the photograph of Vane with Danny's handwritten annotation. She read the audio transcript of Aldridge's voice saying, you know what needs to happen. She looked at the transfer records and the shell company chains and the documentation of 9 years of product moving through a county's child welfare transport system. She read for 4 minutes. Then she put the tablet down and picked up her radio. There was something in the quality of her silence before she spoke, not hesitation, but the particular pause of someone who is ordering a very large number of things in a very short time and ensuring that the order is correct before the words come out. Tactical command. This is SAIC Harlow. I need emergency arrest warrants for one Marcus Vane, also known as Sutton, believed to be currently operating in Harrow Falls County, New York, or in transit from that area by private aviation. I need HRT units to lock down the Harrow Falls County Sheriff's Department. Complete lockdown, no communications in or out, no personnel movement, effective immediately. I need aviation assets covering every private airfield within 60 miles of Harrow Falls County. And I need a full security hold on Agent Douglas Fenn, Counterintelligence Division, pending a counterintelligence review. He is not to leave this building, and he is not to have access to a communications device of any kind. She set the radio on the table. Understood. She looked at Vera. This is going to take several hours to fully process, she said. There is a lot to untangle. Then she looked at Cole again, at this 8-year-old boy who had been in a garbage bag on a frozen highway 6 hours ago and was now sitting in an FBI field office in Albany, drinking hot chocolate and holding his dead father's ring. Something in her expression softened, in the particular way of someone who has spent decades doing difficult work and has retained through all of it the capacity to be moved by what is in front of them. Is there anything either of you needs right now? Cole said, is Vera going to get in trouble for the stuff that happened tonight? Harlow looked at him, then at Vera. That is a complicated question. He's 8, Vera said. Harlow looked back at Cole. No, she said with the directness of someone who understands that children deserve clarity. Vera is not going to be in trouble. What she did tonight is called protecting a material witness, and the people who created the situation that required her to do it are the ones who will be accountable. Cole considered this with the methodical seriousness he brought to information. Okay, he said. He pulled the thermal blanket higher around his shoulders and looked at Vera. You should probably eat something. Vera stared at him. Then for the first time since Route 9 and mile marker 34, in a black garbage bag, in a blizzard, she laughed. It came out without permission. A short, raw, surprise sound that had nothing of performance in it, and everything of actual relief. And it sounded even in her own ears like something that had been held for a very long time and was finally finding its way out. Yeah, she said, I probably should. The next 3 hours moved in the particular way of hours that follow a long and dangerous night, the quality of time that comes when the hands have been forced open and the thing that was being held with such effort has been released to something larger and more capable. Vera sat in the secure conference room and answered Harlow's questions with the same methodical care she brought to everything building the story from the beginning, from Route 9 and the headlight catching something that should not be there through every decision and every door and every road to this room. She held nothing back. There was nothing worth holding back. The television in the corner of the conference room, muted but captioned, showed news footage arriving in the particular way it arrives when something significant is happening. First, a single helicopter shot, then more helicopters, then reporters standing in front of a building with their collars up against the cold, and then the footage that Vera had been waiting for without knowing exactly what it would look like. Sheriff Dale Aldridge being led across a parking lot in handcuffs by federal agents toward a black federal vehicle with government plates. He was wearing his dress uniform, the one he wore for press conferences and official occasions, which suggested he had put it on this morning, expecting a different kind of public appearance. His face had the particular quality of a man who has spent many years being the most powerful person in a room and has now encountered a situation in which that power has been entirely withdrawn and is discovering in real time what his face looks like without it. At 8:12, Harlow's radio produced 2 words from an aviation team. We have him. Marcus Vane, traveling under a name that was his 4th identity, in as many weeks had been 18 minutes from wheels up at a small private airfield east of Saratoga County when federal agents had surrounded the aircraft on the tarmac. He had not been armed. He had not resisted. He had looked at the agents surrounding the plane and had run a final calculation and had accepted its answer. A man who has spent 17 years being the person who closes other people's options understands when his own close that the fight is over. At 9:15, a call came through on the secure conference room landline. Harlow answered it, listened briefly, and passed the receiver to Vera without comment. Vera took it. Static on the line. The particular crackling of a connection being routed through more than one relay. Then beneath the static, a sound, a wet, heavy cough, the cough of someone who has inhaled a great deal of smoke and is managing the aftermath with whatever dignity they can maintain. And then after the cough, a voice, low, rough around the edges in a new way, the new roughness of smoke and cold, and a long night on top of all the old roughnesses, but unmistakably his. Vera, she closed her eyes, let herself have 1 second of it. 1 second of feeling the stone in her chest that had been there for 5 years shift and begin to lift. Then she opened her eyes. "Tell me," she said. "We're in a parking lot in Glens Falls." A pause in which she could hear the wind, could hear other voices in the background, could hear the particular ambient sound of men standing outside in the cold having survived something. "The forge is gone, burned down to the foundation slab. It went clean." Another pause. Vic took a ricochet to the shoulder. "Walt says it's a clean wound, no bone involvement. He'll be functional in 3 weeks. Hank is going to need stitches in several places he is currently pretending don't exist." A brief quality in Rex's voice that was not quite dry amusement, but was adjacent to it. "The rest of us are standing in a parking lot in Glens Falls in borrowed coats, which is where we are." She breathed. "Vane's people?" she asked. "4 did not make it out of the fire. The rest went into the trees before the state police arrived. The state is going to have questions for us about this evening that will require some navigation." A pause. "That's a problem for a different day. Right now, I need to know you got the boy to the building. He's here, he's warm, he had hot chocolate." She looked at Cole across the room. "He told me I should eat something." A pause longer than the others. When Rex spoke again, his voice had changed in a way that was difficult to describe except as the sound of something long held being set down. "Danny would have had something worth hearing to say about tonight," Rex said. "He always did." "He always did," Vera agreed. "Take care of the kid, Rook." "I will." She paused. "Rex, when you're ready, start looking for a new place, somewhere with enough room for a dirt bike track." She heard him exhale long and slow, the exhale of a man releasing a weight that he has been carrying for a very specific and very long time. She handed the receiver back to Harlow. Harlow replaced it in the cradle and sat for a moment looking at Vera. Then she opened her tablet and pulled up a document that Vera recognized by its shape and density as a legal form of some considerable length and specificity. Cole Mercer's placement history in the county welfare system was fraudulent from the beginning, Harlow said. Aldridge's department controlled the case file. They kept him off the legitimate foster and adoption registries. Every placement decision was made by the same system that murdered his father. She set the tablet on the table so Vera could see the document on the screen. "When that history is voided, which it will be within the next 24 hours, as part of the evidence process, Cole Mercer will have no legal guardian on record. That is a situation that needs to be addressed." Vera looked at the document, then across the room at Cole, who had finished his crackers and was turning his father's ring over and over in his hands, with the absorbed, contented attention of a child who has found something worth examining. "What does the process look like?" Vera said. "An attorney, family law specialist, a series of assessments over several months. A hearing." Harlow paused. "The investigating entity in this case has discretion to make a formal recommendation to the court regarding placement, and the investigating entity is this office." She looked at Vera steadily. "I make recommendations I believe in. I don't make ones I don't." "Why would you believe in this one?" Vera asked. Harlow was quiet for a moment, then, "Because I have been doing this work for 22 years, Miss Callahan, and I have read more case files than I can count. And I have met many people who found a child in a dangerous situation and had a choice to make. The quality of that choice tells me more about a person than any amount of formal documentation." She picked up her coffee. "You drove through a blizzard with a dying child pressed against your chest because he had a pulse. You made every decision after that in his interest and no one else's. You drove through the night to put what he was carrying in the right hands. That is not a complicated thing for me to evaluate." Vera said nothing. "Think about it," Harlow said. "There is no urgency today. Today has enough in it already." Vera nodded. She looked back at Cole. He had noticed her looking and met her eyes across the conference room. He held up the ring, tilting it to show her the interior of the jaw, where the hinge was where the 6 words were. The 6 words that his father had put there for the person he trusted. Then Cole closed the jaw, and the skull's face looked back at the world with its permanent closed expression, giving nothing away. "Vera," Cole said. "Yeah, when we go back, will they all be okay?" "The men from the club." "Yes," she said, "they will be." "Are we going to see them?" She thought about Rex in a parking lot in Glens Falls, in a borrowed coat, standing in the cold with 80 other men, who had just watched everything they had built burn down to a concrete slab, figuring out what came next with the particular uncomplaining pragmatism of people who have had to figure out what came next before. She thought about Hank Briggs and his stitches he was refusing to acknowledge. She thought about Vic Tanner's shoulder and Walt Pruitt and the particular quality of men who, when something is destroyed, look at the cleared ground and start planning what to build on it. "We're going home," Vera said. "As soon as we're done here, we're going home." Cole nodded slowly. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then quietly, "I don't have a home." "You do?" Vera said. "You just haven't seen it yet." Cole looked at her. Those gold hazel eyes, Danny's eyes ran their quiet calculation the way Danny's always had, unhurried, complete, arriving at the answer before announcing it. He turned the ring over in his hands one more time. Then he settled it back around his neck and tucked it under his collar where it had lived for 5 years. "Okay," he said. Outside the conference room windows, the winter sun had cleared the Adirondack ridgeline and was laying itself across the snow-covered city in long, flat bars of pale gold, making everything look briefly and improbably clean, the way things always look after a storm, as if the violence of the weather has scoured the world back to some earlier, simpler version of itself. Vera turned her face toward the light and let it hit her, that thin winter warmth, tentative and real and entirely present, and for the first time in 5 years, the stone in her chest was not there. In its place was something else, something lighter and more complicated and considerably less familiar. She had a great deal ahead of her. Hearings and attorneys and an FBI investigation that would run for months and questions she would answer many times until the answers became a matter of official record. She had a new clubhouse to find and a chapter to rebuild and debts of paperwork and process and formal procedure to work through in the particular grinding way that justice works through when it is finally given the materials it needs to function. She had the specific and demanding bureaucracy of becoming a legal guardian to someone else's child to navigate, which she understood would be its own kind of extended blizzard, requiring its own specific stubbornness to get through. She had a boy to take home. She thought about Danny Mercer, who had sat with old Aldous in a jeweler's shop in Saratoga Springs and described exactly what he wanted: the skull, the hidden hinge, the cavity, the space for a card no larger than a thumbnail, and who had known when he did it, what he was building, and why, and for whom. Who had looked across 31 years of shared road and decided without apparently needing to deliberate that when the truth needed protecting and the time finally came, the right person to trust it to was the woman who had always ridden right. She thought he had been correct about that. The months that followed moved in the way that justice moves when it has finally been given what it needs. Not quickly and not without friction and not without the particular exhaustion that comes from participating in a process that demands your presence at every stage of its grinding forward momentum, but with the particular accumulating inevitability of a process that cannot be stopped once it has the facts. It ground forward through hearings and depositions and grand jury proceedings and the extraordinary complexity of untangling a corrupt system that had been running for nearly a decade with the active cooperation of law enforcement, the judiciary, and the social services apparatus of an entire county. Dale Aldridge was indicted on 37 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, in the first-degree obstruction of justice, across multiple cases, racketeering, and the systemic corruption of a child welfare system that had been used to move cartel product through 6 counties for 9 years. He entered a plea arrangement on the 12th count, and the rest of the case continued without him. The plea arrangement offered him nothing he wanted except slightly less time in a federal facility, which was not nothing but was not much. Marcus Vane, whose real name emerged through the investigation as Victor Ashe, a man with 3 distinct legal identities, a decade of documented cartel coordination work and connections to compromise officials in 4 states, was held without bail in a federal facility pending trial. The trial, when it came, ran for 4 months and produced in its discovery phase the names of 4 federal judges, 9 state and local elected officials, 2 sitting members of a state legislature, and 11 other individuals in positions of public trust, whose names became significant news when they were released and considerably more significant when the evidence against them was entered into the record. Agent Douglas Fenn was charged with obstruction, conspiracy to interfere with a federal witness, and 2 counts related to his role as an intelligence asset for Vane's network inside the FBI's Albany field office. He accepted a plea arrangement and received a sentence that Harlow, when she described it to Vera in a brief phone call, characterized simply as appropriate. Danny Mercer's name was cleared. The Department of Justice issued a formal statement describing him as a civilian who had risked and ultimately given his life to expose systemic criminal corruption involving law enforcement, the judiciary, and federal oversight mechanisms. The statement used words like courageous and meticulous and significant and was covered by newspapers and television stations across the region with varying degrees of accuracy and depth. A small bronze plaque appeared on the wall of the Harrow Falls County Courthouse lobby approximately 4 months after the statement installed by parties. The courthouse administration was never able to conclusively identify which read Danny Mercer. He told the truth. Nobody removed it. The upstate chapter rebuilt. Rex found the property in April when the snow had gone and the mud season was turning towards something that would eventually become actual spring. A decommissioned dairy farm in the hills 12 miles north of Harrow Falls, 20 acres of fenced land, a central processing building large enough to convert into a functional clubhouse, 4 outbuildings in varying states of repair, and a long flat stretch of cleared ground to the east that Vera identified within 5 minutes of walking the property as having ideal potential for a dirt track. The conversion took 4 months and required the kind of sustained collective effort that large groups of determined people are capable of when they have a clear goal and no shortage of motivation. Men who had spent years maintaining motorcycles turned out to be equally capable of framing walls and laying electrical conduit and building the kind of permanent infrastructure that a place needs to feel like it belongs to the people who use it. They poured a new concrete floor in the main structure. They built a proper bar from oak. They milled themselves from trees they took off the back acreage. They installed the ironwood stove that had been salvaged from the steel mill's ruin. It had survived the fire intact, which struck everyone who had known the forge as exactly right. By August, the new place, which took its name from the land it sat on and was called the Hayward Farm, in the official club records, though everyone who used it just called it the farm, was operational in all the ways that mattered. By September, the dirt track had been graded and packed and used for the first time. Cole Mercer became Cole Callahan in a family court proceeding on a Tuesday afternoon in late March in a courtroom in Harrow Falls County that 6 months earlier had been part of the infrastructure of the system that had taken everything from him. The judge was direct and efficient. The paperwork was complete and accurate. Harlow's formal recommendation to the court, which, as she had predicted to Vera, carried the weight she had suggested it might, had been filed 3 days after the night in Albany, before the ink was dry on the first arrest warrants written with the particular clarity and conviction of someone who has made a decision and is not uncertain about it. Vera signed the guardianship documents with the pen she used for everything that mattered. Then she drove them both north to the farm, to the new clubhouse, to the 80 men who had spent the intervening months finding every legal and appropriate way to express an entirely disproportionate amount of satisfaction about the outcome of everything. Hank Briggs had, without being asked, without mentioning it to anyone in advance, built a shed beside the dirt track. It was a good shed, solidly constructed, well-roofed with a proper door and a concrete floor and shelving along the back wall for helmets and gear and the assorted equipment that accumulates wherever motorcycles and the people who ride them spend time together. Hank had not mentioned building it to anyone. He had not asked for input or approval or assistance. He had simply appeared one Saturday morning with lumber in the bed of his truck and a set of plans in his head and had built it over the course of a week while everyone else was busy with the other work of the farm, and by the time it was done and the bike was inside and the helmet was hanging from the handlebar, it was obvious that it had always been going to be exactly this. Inside a dirt bike, small and appropriately sized for an 8-year-old learning for the first time with new grips and a clean chain that had been oiled that morning, and a helmet hanging from the right handlebar in a green that was almost exactly the color of the pine forest at the edge of the farm's eastern property line. Cole walked around it twice. He touched the handlebars and the tank and the seat and the chain guard and the helmet, each in turn, with the particular deliberate reverence of a child who has learned that good things do not always last and who therefore pays attention to them while they are present. He looked at the way the light came through the shed door and fell across the bike's tank. He looked at the helmet, at the color of it, at the way it would fit over his head, the way his mother's hand had fit over his when he was very small, and everything felt manageable. Then he stood still for a moment with both hands at his sides, looking at the whole of it, the bike and the helmet, and the shed and the dirt track visible through the open door, and the white Adirondack sky above all of it, blue and clear and limitless in the way that skies are after a storm has spent itself completely. Then he looked up at Vera. "You have to teach me," he said. "That is exactly what I intend to do," Vera said. Rex Holloway stood in the doorway of the shed with a coffee cup in both hands, and the patient watching quality that had defined him for as long as Vera had known him, the quality of a man who finds his specific satisfaction in seeing things work the way they should. He caught Vera's eye across the shed. He did not say anything. He gave a single small nod. She nodded back. She picked up the helmet from the handlebars and set it carefully on Cole's head and worked the chin strap through its buckle, making the adjustment that fit it properly to the shape of his skull, to the specific contours of Danny Mercer's son's head, and she smoothed the strap when she had it right and stepped back and looked at him sitting on the bike. He climbed on without being told, with the immediate and absolute fearlessness of a child who has never been taught to hesitate at the beginning of things. He put his hands on the grips. He sat straight. He looked at the dirt track through the open shed door, at the packed clay and the curves in the long, straight stretch at the far end where the ground leveled out before the tree line. Then he looked at Vera with his father's gold hazel eyes clear and steady and entirely without fear, and waited. "Ready," Vera said. "Ready," said Cole. The winter was over. The long winter, the one that had lasted 5 years and one night in a blizzard on Route 9, was finally and completely over. And what came after it was this: a boy on a dirt bike in the morning light, a woman who had ridden through everything the road had to offer and was still standing and still riding and still finding on the other side of the worst of it things worth riding toward. 80 men who had built something twice and would build it again as many times as necessary, standing in the sun at the edge of a farm in the Adirondack Hills, watching what came next begin. The ring was around Cole's neck. The chain that had carried it through everything was worn but unbroken. And above the farm, above the dirt track and the pine trees and the new roof of the new clubhouse, where the iron stove from the steel mill's ruin burned, and through its heat, the sky was clear and cold and blue and going on in every direction without limit, the way it does after a storm, the way it always does.